Hello everyone, my name is Paula Doolan and on behalf of the MGA I'd like to welcome you to our webinar being hosted by Charles Taylor in conjunction with Covey Analytics. Just before I introduce you to our host, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points if I may. You should all be muted and videos turned off please. And this webinar is suitable for CPD points if relevant to your professional development programme. If you'd like to ask a question, please do. And if you go to the chat button at the end of your screen, you can actually pose your questions there. And Waleed will answer these at the Q&A at the end of the session. So the topic of today's webinar is exploring a new operational model to achieve operational efficiency. And presenting is Waleed Salwar, founder and CEO of Covey Analytics. Now, Waleed is not only an electric engineer and an accountant, but he is also an ex-regulator and very experienced in designing and implementing business processes and has worked with Tier 1 insurers for the past 15 years plus. So it should be a very, very interesting presentation today with all of Waleed's experience, particularly as a regulator. Now, before Waleed takes you through this presentation, he'd like you to take a poll. And I'd like you to look and please, if you could, if you would answer the 4 questions that you will see on your screen now. There's quite a few questions. If you could just enter the poll, that would be great. And Waleed then will be able to share the results with you. And over to you now, Waleed. Thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Thanks for that wonderful intro and very pleased to be here. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Let me just double check. Yep, my screen's also on. Let's just leave the poll on for a bit and give people some time to complete it before I'll start talking, and it won't end till the time runs out. I'll just go on mute for a second.
I'm sharing results now with you, Waleed. I hope you can see.
Yes, and I'm sharing my screen, so I suspect that if I can see them, everyone should be able to see them as well. So yeah, just a quick recap. We skipped the first question. That's just to see where people are coming from. But it feels like a lot of people are responsible for one or more policies, so that this session will be quite relevant for you. We've got, all right, so there's a well articulation of the key operational expectations. That's good. And then you have the people involved with the development of your business policies, which seems to be almost everyone except the board. So it's a board subcommittee that gets involved. Excellent. So I guess with that poll out of the way, let's make a start and hopefully that give you a sense of what we would be covering. So as Paula said, I used to work at the PRA developing something called Solvency II, if you've heard of it. And a lot of my team joked that we are now solving a problem that I created. So so let's look at what it is that our value proposition. So effectively, the problem statement that we're looking to address is the significant effort that is spent every year in managing large document suites that add no value to the business operations. So this is where you can spend anywhere between 4 to 12 weeks updating your business policies, let's say outsourcing, and operationally you're no better off than you were at the start of that process. So it's done completely for the purposes of appeasing external third parties like the regulators, but it adds no value to the business operations. And what we're doing is we're helping regulated firms achieve operational efficiency by redefining how they instruct, measure, and monitor their business activities. So what do I mean by that? So the way currently businesses are instructed is through standards, policies, procedures that sounds like most of you are aware of. But the business themselves don't actually read it. And they go on and do their things in Excel, the operational aspects of it. And that's largely because the table is already drawn in Excel. So when you have to report upwards of what the business is doing and what the board has set in their policies, it becomes a bit of a operational nightmare just in all that reporting. So one of my favorite questions that I used to ask board members in preparation for Solvency II was, what policies do you own? And they'd get very excited, we own outsourcing, business continuity, etc. And the minute you ask them follow-up questions as to when was the last, what do you do in the business to help ensure that your team is delivering against that policy, they start humming and umming, not quite clear on what the underlying business activities are that support it, with the exception of certain areas like DCP. And then you have the third question that really trumped them was, when was the last time it was done? And they're like, oh, I need to get back to it in 2 weeks' time. So it's very convoluted process that has very little engagement and adds very little value to the business. And the way we measure and monitor the instructions is through a risk cycle of sorts. So identify, assess, analyze. At that point, the business is completely disengaged. And it's like, just tell me what I need to do so I can get on with my day job. So the way we instruct, measure, and monitor currently, it's broken. And the way we are thinking about it differently is within your policy document suite, you have nuggets of information. Let's call them policy principles and pull them out. So as an example, for your outsourcing policy, you would have 5 principles in there. There is the have a procurement process, do onboarding and ongoing due diligence, perform, have a business continuity plan for your critical suppliers, and maintain a supplier list. That pretty much covers the bulk of your outsourcing policy. The rest of the verbiage is all just padding that makes that document bigger. And then having defined these policy principles, you can start outlining, here it is. You can start outlining, go back, sorry about that. You can start outlining what could go wrong if you do not follow this policy principle. What controls do we have in place to help manage these, the risks of things going wrong? What indicators do we have in place to help monitor them? So we don't use a syntax of KRIs, KCIs, KPIs, because everyone has a different interpretation of it. Rather, it's just an indicator that helps manage and monitor a particular policy principle. And what actions do we take when things go wrong here, here, or here? So that's the theory of it, the approach that we're using. This approach has helped, we've recently helped an MGA incubator reduce their business documentation from 300 plus pages to 30 pages of discrete activities. So what was typically happening was as they were onboarding a new appointed representative, someone who was working off their license, they were handing them over large document suites. So here's the documents you need to comply with. The AR at the receiving end wasn't quite sure what to do with it. They would take a lot of time to read through it, but weren't quite sure what are the discrete activities they need to put in place. So by using this approach, we've helped reduce the onboarding times for new ARs by giving them very clear instructions of what they need to do. We've reduced the oversight cost because you can now perform oversight of the business activities performed by these appointed reps through a desktop-based exercise rather than having to do site visits. And we've improved the quality of the oversight because all the business activities are supported by evidence, which are captured in the platform. So it simplifies the whole process. So hopefully this gives you a sense of the theory, so to speak. But let me show you what that looks like in practice. So if we go to the demo, give me 1 second, let's jump onto it. So this is our platform when we first jump onto it. Again, we've got your risks, controls, indicators, and actions, the four bits around the circle. But we will look at our policies. So let's look at our outsourcing policy. So here, let me just create some space. Before you look at anything, this is what you know that for the outsourcing policy, there are a number of risks that are associated with this policy. There are a number of controls that are helping support this policy. If you hover over them, it tells you what the controls are, and the color indicates how they're currently performing in the business. So red, amber, green, the typical RAG status that you have. Blue means it's a new control that's not active yet. You define the objective of what you're trying to achieve out of this. So benefits of using third parties while preserving are preserved while the risk created by reliance on them is minimized. you can then attach what the outcome is if the business was to follow these instructions. This is where, if you are familiar with risk appetites within a business, so the way we think of how the policies come into play is the board sets their risk appetite, where they're looking to sort of make money versus take a defensive position. They then say, that's the outcome we want to achieve. So what instructions do we want to give the business? And that's how it links into the policy. So the outcome is that there's no material disruption to the business as it is as a result of a third-party supplier failure. You then have the governance for who owns, reviews, and manages this particular policy. And then we have principles, like I mentioned. So established procedures and governance for selecting external suppliers. And so the board is, rather than approving a large document, 15 pages plus, instead what they do is they establish principles and say, if this principle was to be met, what good looks like in the business. So you'd have a viability test, onboarding, due diligence, so on. This principle then gets assigned to an exec within the business. And what they do is they say, for this principle, clicking on this green arrow, we have two risks, which is breach of regulatory duty and inadequate management of external suppliers. These are the owners in the business who are helping manage it. And this is the current risk score, for instance. So rather than having a couple of paragraphs that talk about the board shall do this, the risk committee shall do this, this helps significantly improve the transparency and accountability of who's doing what within the business. So here, for this particular principle, the supporting controls are a procurement procedure and a risk committee. And it's owned by myself for the procurement, and this initial setup who owns this particular risk committee piece. And so on. So you start articulating these principles. So maintaining a list of all material external suppliers. Again, there it's the list of suppliers and a procurement procedure. You can effectively use the same control across multiple principles, allowing you to eliminate replication within your business processes. And the way you do that is you have, if I click on that, it helps me update the relational information. So I'm looking at controls, and for the sake of argument, let's say the board risk appetite statement and capital model validation is also helping me manage list of all suppliers for the sake of argument. And there you have it. You've got these capital model validation and risk appetite statements added to this particular principle, and so on. So effectively, it's a new approach to thinking about policies and business instructions that are viable for the data age. Because in the data age, people don't like to read lots of text, and given the fact that everyone's got a short attention span, they want to get to the nuggets of information they want, as opposed to having to skim through a 15-page document. A couple of things to note: you do not lose your original policies that you currently have in place. You can have them attached to this. So this becomes a means for you to implement your policies, but you can have your 16-page plus policy, a traditional policy, attached to this. So you can say, look, we've been updating it. Here's the latest version, but this is how it hits the road. And this we also allow you to export these policies. So if I've got some examples open here. So you have your business continuity policy, and a typical policy with this new approach looks a bit like this. So you've got a policy on a page. You have your objective, the outcome, the governance, and the principles. And that effectively tells you what your key policy principles are for business continuity. And then for each subsequent page, you would have the principle, what good looks like, and then what are the risks and the controls supporting it, with the ownership and the latest implementation or latest status for these risks and controls, and so on. Hopefully everyone's with me. I can't see any faces, so I'm not sure how lost you are, but let me show you one other policy, financial crime. And the reason why this policy is quite interesting is because this policy tends to lend itself to having baby policies as well. So you have your financial crime policy, and then you have your anti-money laundering policy, then ABC policy, sanctions policy, all sitting under the financial crime umbrella. which just explodes the overhead associated with managing all these documents. And as one gets updated, it triggers a chain reaction of updates. So in our world, a financial crime policy, again, you've got the objective, which is to limit firms' reputational damage or exposure to financial crime. And then you can start saying the outcome is the staff awareness, robust control environment, and no reported breaches of financial crime, which links more with a board appetite around financial crime and operations aspect of it. But rather than having, excuse me, rather than having child policies, if you think about it from a principal perspective, you have an awareness of financial crime, which is, I think everyone's aware of the mandatory training that's required. They can say awareness of financial crime, and then these are the topics the training should be covering. So AML, sanctions, anti-bribery. And again, if you look at the underlying control supporting it, some of the dummy data, but it's a mandatory training, the risk committee. Again, here's an example where you've used one control to help mitigate and manage multiple risks or meet multiple principal needs, policy principal needs. Review of financial crime prevention approach. This is more around the horizon scanning of regulatory changes. So as the regulation changes, you are then updating your business processes to reflect those changes. But the interesting bit is, instead of having a separate policy for AML, for sanctions, for anti-bribery, it's rather a simple principle. So effective management of anti-money laundering. And there, if you look at the control supporting it, you've got mandatory training for all staff, which again, you're reusing from a control that we used earlier, review of money laundering process, financial crime checks, due diligence log, new client onboarding, and then money laundering officer. So rather than someone in the business reading 15, 20 pages and thinking, okay, what do I need to do? Instead, they get to look at what are the controls that are supporting it, and then they get to update those. And I'll show you briefly, very quickly in a bit, how you go about updating these controls. So yeah, so I won't labor the point, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how we are thinking about policies differently, where rather than just managing large document suite for the sake of managing them, we are thinking about them differently, completely from a first principle basis of how we would instruct the business in today's data age, given the tools we have. The next bit where we are sort of pushing the boundaries a little bit is around business processes. So this is where the document gets thicker. And as you can tell, I'm not a big fan of reading thick documents. So we thought, why couldn't it be a tube map of your activities within the business? So what I mean by that is, let me show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to go to our map. So this is our external supplier procurement process. And effectively, you have a series of activities. So you have a pre-outsourcing analysis, a risk assessment, selection process, and so on. And for each activity, you define what the objective of the activity is. So determine whether potential outsourcing within the board risk appetite. How do you risk assess critical material, other, whatever the criteria may be. You can also attach any templates, like a business plan template that you'd expect the business to complete when doing a risk assessment for a new supplier. So any detailed instructions you want, you can have in here, and you can attach as many templates you like for it. You've got ownership as well, so you can say which teams are involved in carrying out this particular activity, who are the reviewers, who are the doers. And what that allows us to do is, if you start populating the systems used for each activity, we can also then give you insight into how which users have access to which systems. What kind of training do you need for that particular activity? So you can be quite specific. You can say, it's module 3 of training 5, as opposed to sending someone to a whole day training. You can be more directional at creating different learning paths for different staff members. Again, audit, when was the last audit done on this particular process, and what were the findings? So it was major improvement needed. But ultimately, every time you undertake an activity, things could go wrong. So what is the risks of things going wrong? What are the controls you have in place to make sure they don't? What are the indicators to monitor things are operating effectively and what action they're taking when things are going wrong. So effectively, it comes back to that one basic approach where you're thinking about operational aspect of what could go wrong, how do we manage it, how do we track it or monitor it, and what actions do we take when things go wrong. So that's it. We always come back to that core principle. And then with this approach, we are effectively replacing your Visio diagrams, which tend to be quite complicated. And people creating those diagrams often need half an hour to remind themselves what they'd drawn if they hadn't seen it for 2 weeks, because a Visio flow chart tries to capture input, output, and processing. And what we've done with this simplified approach is to collapse the input, output, and the processing as a single bubble. So that way you can simplify it so it's more usable while not losing the flexibility you'd have with your diagram. There are some nifty things which I won't go into too much detail, but you can create tasks that happen in parallel. But I'll skip that for now. And once you've created all these tracks, these tube tracks, let me use a different example. Let me just, nope, actually no, not that. So here what we have is we have your external supplier, the procurement, external supplier renewal and oversight, and then termination. So you can break a particular process down into as many tracks as you like. So your district line, your northern line, and so on. But what you can then do is you can pull them all together for an end-to-end business process. So you say, we do our procurement process, then we do our renewal process, and then we do termination in parallel. And then what you can do is you can start mapping it. So effectively what I've done is I've done an end-to-end process mapping. Currently, this is quite challenging to do because by the time you finish creating all the documentation, someone's changed something somewhere. Whereas this approach allows you to be quick and nimble in how you create the big picture without creating all the overhead of managing it. Secondly, we know what are the controls supporting a particular process. So if a control fails here, we can tell you what the downstream impact of that control failing is. For instance, often what you have is someone in the collections team has made an error, but that has a downstream impact on the payments, the finance, et cetera, et cetera. So this approach gives you that visibility without all the overhead associated with managing a large end-to-end business process. Hopefully everyone's with me so far. I'll just take a pause here and grab quick water. So what you've done is through policies and business processes, you've articulated what are the business activities or controls or risks that need to be managed. The way it hits the business is you have a list of all your controls, the control register, and you say, I'm in the finance team, and these are all the things I should be doing. Doesn't matter where they come from, whether it's a business policy, a business procedure, a compliance requirement, doesn't matter. These are the things I need to be doing. Some are annual, some are monthly. Here's one sign of authority matrix. Let's have a look what this is all about. Let me see if I can find one with procurement. So here's the underwriting data quality. You can define what the objective is, ensure the data is used for underwrite complete, accurate, and timely, and have additional details on the instructions. What the business then do on an ongoing basis and say, yep, we've done it. It's effective. It's designed effectively. It's operating effectively. Here are some comments, and then they can either attach some evidence supporting it, or they can just say, I confirm the evidence is available, and then submit. So for us, one of the key things is that business people in the first line, the business teams, have a day job, and that's what they should be focusing on. So we have one of our key KPIs is click factor. How many clicks does it take for the business in a BAU environment to provide this update? And we encourage these updates for the first line. So we encourage people to do it for the first line, not for the second line or the third, not for the risk and compliance teams, not for the internal audit teams. It's effectively, I am the CFO. I am responsible for all these activities because I had the finance team. I would expect my team to report to me using this tool. So that way I have the evidence. If I go back to, was it the underwriting center that we just updated? If there is something here. So if I go to what we call the cards page, the detail page, then we can see the walls from a controls perspective. Now, appreciate this might be going into too much detail, but I just want to highlight at this stage that you have the underlying detail for it. So this is a cards page for controls. So this is the detail page for controls. And here you have the objective of what this control is, the instructions, the latest assessment, and the comment and any documents. Also, what are the associated risks for this particular control? What is this control helping support from a risk perspective, from indicators and actions? And down here in track and trends, it also shows you when was the last time it was assessed on 25th of September 2019, so a while back. So you have the version history of it, or the audit logs, so to speak. Let me just quickly show you in our other environment, which has a bit more of colorful dummy data, so to speak, just to give you a sense of what it looks like when it starts filling up a little bit. So if I go to, it's insisting I change my password. Okay. So I'm just gonna pick a control. So here's a sort of more populated example where you have your instructions. What are the steps you need the business to take? The evidence that's been attached. There are a number of risks attached to this particular one. Just to highlight that particular number in a little circle. If you're tracking your risk events, we sort of play those back to you by showing you that there have been 5 risk events for risk 1, and the highest of that was a rated red, or depending on how you score your risk events. So effectively, you have a simplified way of getting all the contextual information before you make a decision. Let me just quickly show you the track and trends, just to show you what it looks like as you get the data building over time, along with all the attached documents that you can click and test or review. You also have audit trail of any changes to the basic information. So on the 26th of Jan, the ownership was changed to Kevin, and he was also the manager. So hopefully this gives you a sense of how it comes together. And in terms of, so what we've done is we've gone from policies to identify controls, to processes to identify controls, and then capturing those business activities, just building up to it. But you don't need the policies, or you don't need the procedures, but that's how you build them up. And on a day-to-day basis, the way you would engage with this is you would have every user has an activity wall that's tailored to them. So so my activity wall shows me that I've got 7 risks, 31 controls, 2 indicators, and 1 action. Again, back to our ethos of minimizing the effort for the business to provide the updates. You can say, look, I just want to look at all my controls. There's one that's quite overdue. I can do the assessment from here. So I can say, yep, this is it. I confirm, and then I can just approve it. I don't need to attach anything. So you don't have to jump between different screens to get the data. And we've got a number of dashboards. If you've got this dashboard, we've got one that shows you a risk view. Appreciate that not many people may be involved with risk, but effectively here's an example where effectively what's saying is of the insurance risk, op risk, financial risk, there are 3 risks where something is wrong and it feels like the indicator is out of bound, or you're out of risk appetite, so to speak. We've also got a control matrix that is a visualization showing these are all your risks, these are all your controls. Control 11 is amber. You can say, okay, so what other controls do we have on risk 5 because that's a threat? Or we've got plenty of other, do we need control 11 or not? So you can start having those conversations to identify efficiencies within your business, because often what happens is on day one of my job, I had a list of controls that I need to operate, and I've just been operating them, and no one's really challenged why we are doing it. So this sort of visualizations or helicopter view without all the noise of list of controls, list of indicators, and so on, allows you to take a step back and start seeing efficiencies or gaps within your operational sort of framework to see where you need to let those. And that's where the sort of the analytics piece come along to really help support that. This is, again, I'm just sort of jumping around a little bit, but hopefully it gave you a sense of how we have taken the, let me just jump back to our presentation. Hopefully this gives you a sense of how we've thought about the framework differently compared to how it's done today. Then thought about, okay, the issue with a framework that tracks business activities from a compliance perspective or risk perspective is that it tends to be owned by risk and compliance teams and not the business. So the business never engages with it. However, the compliance happens in the first line in the business teams. The risk is taken by the first line. So why isn't the COO or the CEO owning the operating model, which also then services compliance request, risk request, or internal audit request? So hopefully that demo gives you a sense of how we are bringing to life the new operating model that we are sort of exploring. So to take a look at the big picture, you've got the core operating model, which we creatively call core, with the policy principle at the center, which the board says thou should achieve this, surrounded by what could go wrong in achieving it, what can we do to help achieve it, and so on. And then we can build other bits around it. So you saw our approach to business processes, where we are challenging the status quo by saying, no, big, thick policy procedure documents or Visio charts aren't really helping the business. So how can we reinvent it? We've got, let's see, I think risk events we didn't go into, but we've got risk events. In terms of SMCR and responsibilities maps, etc., we don't feel that job descriptions do justice to what people do. So the way we're thinking about that differently is allowing users to say, these are the list of controls, risks, indicators that I help the business manage. And that way you've got a more fluid approach to your job description, which is way easier to then demonstrate it, how well you're achieving it, because all your controls were rated green, you're performing all the business activities in a timely manner, and so on and so forth. So it just makes it more data rich when you come to report on the SMCR activity to the regulator, as well as just internally within the business, you know exactly who's got how much on their plate. One other thing that we're also sort of thinking about very differently is training. If you go down the principal approach, you don't need people to sit once a year in front of the computer for 45 minutes to deliver, to undertake training. Rather, you can have training via email where you're just shooting out principles and saying, this is the principle that we all live by, and here are the controls of business activities that help support it. So if we take gifts and hospitality, for instance, you can have an email fire out in tail end of November, just before everyone gets their gifts in December, similarly over the summertime. So you can have it, almost have a sort of event-based training as opposed to sort of retrospective once a year training. So hopefully that makes sense. There's a bigger picture to it. And then just to wrap this up, the learning outcomes for this session is really to explore with you a new operating model that innovates on the existing practices. So we are not incrementally sort of changing existing practices. We are sort of thinking about them differently from first principles. And hopefully by listening to this, you get a sense of what those first principles are that we started from. Then there is a practical example. So hopefully the demo helped land how we are helping deliver the approach that we've developed. And we've been testing this. So we've got tier 1 insurance companies, startup banks, an MGA incubator, along with some small fintechs who are using this approach to streamline their operations. And I guess if you were to take away one thing from the session is, when you go back to your desks and if you own policies, is to start thinking about what are the principles in those policies. Can you really shrink them down into a side of A4 with a couple of principles, and on the other side, what controls you have in the business to help meet those principles. And as a rule of thumb, we encourage our customers to think about it, have no more than 5 controls per principle. What are the 5 key things that you really care about that helps you deliver that principle? Because it's very easy to end up with 200, 300 list of controls, and that just becomes paralysis by analysis type thing. And then the third thing you can think about is what evidence could you show or have in place or point to that will help demonstrate that those controls are operating effectively. Those 3 things, then you're in good space to start helping or start identifying operational efficiencies in your business. I think I'll take a break here. I mean, that was all I was gonna rattle through. Hopefully that made sense. I guess we can open for questions.
Yes, Wally, we have a couple of questions. The first one that's come in is this aimed at all intermediaries and not just an incubator operation?
Yeah, no, so this is aimed at all regulated businesses, because if you take a step back and think about it, all regulated businesses have to instruct their teams to do certain things, which are effectively activities that you need to do in order to continue meeting your authorization requirement, which is what compliance is, in other words. So, like I said, we've got customers ranging from tier 1 insurers to Bermudan-based reinsurers, a couple of payment firms, a startup bank. So anywhere where you have a large overhead of managing a policy document suite that's adding no value, that's where this proposition is designed for.
Thank you, Waleed. And where is the service hosted? The cloud, on premises?
Yes, so we offer both options, and we also sort of multi-cloud. So we've got the service hosted in AWS, which is the Amazon Web Services, Azure. There's one with IBM. What's it called? Yeah, there's an IBM service. I can't remember. I think they recently rebranded, but IBM hosting as well. So we are flexible enough to either offer a fully managed service with our sort of security protocols, which we discuss with the client's IT team, or we can pick up our application and put it behind into their servers wherever they may be. It might be on-prem, or it might be in their cloud.
And finally, what's Covy's typical onboarding process and timelines, Waleed?
Yes, so that's a good question. We had initially some objections, like we've got our policies, they're sat there, no one wants to touch them. So what we've done is we've created a library of policy principles and recommended risks and controls. So firms may think that they're different from the guy next door, but technically the policy principles that I rattled through for outsourcing would be the same for most firms, at least as a baseline. So what we do as part of the onboarding is we say, we'll do the bulk of the heavy lifting, send us your policies, we'll tease out the principles from it, in addition to what's in our library, and then that takes about 2 weeks. And what we then present to you is, here is a starter for 10 for what your policy principles would look like, along with what controls you'd expect to see. And then what we see clients do is they go in and say, no, we don't call it business continuity group, we call it business disruption group. that meets every 3 months as opposed to every 6 months. So then they're going in and tweaking, making small tweaks while discussing with the business. And one of the things we recommend is we recommend that all controls should be in the language of the business, because as a regulator, I've seen far too many times, you take a list of all the controls the business is meant to be operating from the internal audit team and from the risk team, and put that in front of the business. They won't recognize half of it, because the internal audit team controls will be predominantly in a language that meets the expectations of an external auditor. For the risks, the controls they have in place would be in a language that are more close to the risk and compliance requirements. And the business does not understand half the time what the syntax is. So that's why, as part of the onboarding process or the rollout process, we encourage all our clients to go and talk to the business while they're tailoring these controls for their needs. That way they can start their journey on embedding the new business activities control framework within the business.
Wally, thank you very much. We're on time and on point, and thank you for a very interesting and detailed presentation today. And to you, our audience, thank you for attending. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, which has been held on the 15th of October, and it's been hosted by one of our supplier members, Softelligent. So we hope to see you all then. So it leaves me nothing else to say except goodbye. And once again, thank you all for joining. Thank you.